A lot of people, when they're first getting into running, they will follow a strict training plan. They'll find a race that they want to run, whether that's a 5K or a marathon, and then they'll find a training plan, whether that's on a blog or from an influencer or from ChatGPT, and then they'll follow that training plan. And a lot of times it works. They'll run their race, they'll hit their goal, but after that, it seems like their dedication to running seems to waver. At least that's been my experience. I've watched extremely motivated people run a race and then take off their shoes after the race and never put them on again. I'm not saying that once you start running, you have to continue to run, but a lot of these people just let it fall off without a second thought. And I've covered this failure to continue to run in multiple videos. And I think it's the failure of the person to shift their motivation to run from extrinsic motivation to intrinsic motivation. I recently heard one of my favorite modern day philosophers, one of my favorite thinkers today, Ian McGilchrist, he said something that parallels this perfectly. He said, "Creating an ethical list of rules is unethical, and following a list of rules does not make you ethical nor good." In Buddhism, there's an allegory that epitomizes this perfectly. In the allegory, there's a master and a student, and the master points to the moon. And instead of looking to the moon, the student marvels at the finger pointing to the moon, marvels at the elegance of the gesture and the accuracy of the point. And the student fails to take in the beauty of the actual moon, and instead focuses on the finger pointing to the moon. Now, with the quote from McGilchrist in this allegory of Buddhism, obviously, running is not a question of ethics, but I do think that this applies to both running and life. Because a lot of these people that create and follow these strict running plans fail to become a runner. And so you could say that creating and following a strict running plan does not make you a runner. I used to be one of these runners that was incredibly dogmatic when it came to training for races. You could say that my training plan was my ethical list of rules on how to become a runner, and I was extremely rigid in following that list. And like I mentioned before, the results from these training plans weren't that bad. I was actually hitting a lot of my goals, and I was achieving a lot of what I wanted to. But the problem is that I wasn't understanding the why behind these guidelines and these rules and the training plans. And that was leading to burnout and fragility when the conditions weren't lining up perfectly according to my training plan. But that all changed when I was able to read a book, and the title of the book is Training for the Uphill Athlete. And that completely changed my perspective. It allowed me to see the why behind the guidelines, behind the rules. I learned about ATB and the metabolic process and Zone 2 training and the physics and science and biology behind running. It helped me understand why the rules were set up the way they were and the wisdom behind those rules. And once I was able to understand that, it gave me the ability to do two things. Number one, appreciate the rules. And number two, learn how to break the rules intelligently. In other words, the knowledge that I gained from understanding the why behind the rules gave me the wisdom to know when to push harder than the schedule says, and to know when rest is more important than the plan. For most of my life, I focused too much on following the rules, and I don't think I'm alone in that. But the thing is the rules are only useful as much as they are pointing you to something real. If you fixate too much on following the rules perfectly, then you've missed the whole point. And this allegory from Buddhism is not the only wisdom tradition that talks about something like this. In my opinion, Jesus embodied this sort of Buddhist rule-breaking spirit. When he healed people on the Sabbath, he was reorienting people towards the moon. He was showing the people at the time that they had mistaken the rule for the destination. Jesus flipped the religious ideals of the time on their head when he said that he came to fulfill the law, and he gave two great commandments: to love God and love your neighbor. He was showing people that they had forgotten the moon and they were worshiping the finger. He once again pointed the finger to the moon. In Taoism, there's the idea that the eternal Tao cannot be spoken. The quote says, "The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao." This illustrates the idea that language, rules, and teachings are all just fingers pointing. True wisdom is Wu Wei, which is effortless action or action without attachment. Action that is completely aligned with the Tao and does not need a rule book. Because if it is in a rule book, then it is not the eternal Tao. And so I don't think McGilchrist is being provocative when he said what he said. I think he is reiterating something that's been culturally understood throughout the centuries, the idea that intentions matter. It's the whole idea about the person who doesn't steal out of fear for being caught versus the person who doesn't steal because it violates something fundamental about the way that they want to move through the world. Which one of those people is really good? Which one of them is truly ethical? If you're just obedient to the rules out of fear, are you really good or are you just a coward? In regards to running, it's not about becoming a true runner. I don't really care about that, but what I think a lot of us want to do is integrate running to become a part of a healthy lifestyle. For runners, the training plan is the finger pointing to the moon, and the moon is the knowledge of speed work and long runs and recovery days. But it is up to us to apply that knowledge with wisdom. Some of us need to start with rule books. I will never deny that. But at some point, we need to leave that rule book behind if we're going to really integrate running into our lives and if we're going to move from that extrinsic motivation to the intrinsic motivation. When we do that, that's when running moves from something we have to do to something that we love to do. And so what I think running and McGilchrist and Buddhism and Jesus and Taoism, what all of these things are saying is that when we mistake the ethical rule book for the destination, we are completely missing the point and we fail to become good. We fail to integrate these good things into our lives. At least that's what I got from all of this. And as always, I am not an expert in any of this. This is me just thinking out loud because I find it fascinating. And I hope it was fascinating and interesting and thought-provoking for you. And if it was, I hope you'll stick around and I'll catch you in the next video.